the US believes, and the Israelis believe, that Iran has never been weaker. And they also think that they have to stop Iran from having nuclear weapons and missiles. He said, we can kill anyone, anywhere, anytime. And you can see the assassinations that Israel has carried out in Iran. And Bibi Netanyahu has made it his life mission to go down in Israeli history as the man who guarantees Israeli security. And he believes that peace through strength is the way forward. The Ayatollah, before he died, had told everyone to prepare for 4 levels of succession. Okay? Mm-hmm. So X dies, Y takes over. Y dies, Z takes over. Z dies, Q takes over. So without ground troops, and I don't think Americans will stand for it. That's a red line. I don't think. You can send special ops soldiers, and I'm sure they are there, but you can't politically send ground troops. The dream scenario for some people is that Azerbaijan moves against Iran, and Pakistan moves against Iran, and the Gulf Arabs all unite.
Hello and welcome to FO Live. Today in our editorial workshop, we will be discussing the current US-Israel-Iran war.
Excellent, and we'll be going into the context. Is that right, Cheyenne?
Yes, we will be going into the context.
All right. So, very quickly, tensions between Israel and Iran and the US have been building up for a while. So, why? Once upon a time, Israel and Iran were actually allies. This is as late as 1979. This is well before some people were born in this FO Live, but after some of us others were born. So the water supply of Tehran actually was apparently built by the Israelis, and today, of course, we have a water crisis because the Iranian regime has not quite managed water supplies well, and a lot of people say, well, if only they were friends with the Israelis, they wouldn't have a water crisis. Well, hey-ho, there we go. Lots of talk here, there, and everywhere. The context of the US-Israel-Iran war in modern times goes back to really 2 dates, 1948, 1953. Actually, 3 dates, 1948, 1953, and 1979. So 1948, very important date. Israel is born. Arab states invade Israel. They think that the British were devious in promising a homeland for the Jews. They think that this European settlement of Arab lands is unjust. And basically everyone just invades a young nation immediately after World War II. And the Israelis fight them off, and a lot of Palestinians leave. And the Palestinians remember it as Nakba, the Great Exodus. The Israelis remember 1948 as a perilous moment where their young nation was almost snuffed out at the very time of its birth. And it's just 3 years after World War II ends, and in World War II, we know the Jewish people are traumatized by the Holocaust. Yeah, millions die, unspeakable horrors occur in concentration camps. So after 1948, Israel is very determined to have very strong national defense, and it has tensions with Arab states and many wars with Arab states, which continue, and you can argue they have become lesser in magnitude. Now they are not fighting state actors, they are fighting Hamas and Hezbollah. The most recent war was against Hamas, which isn't really a state, it isn't Egypt. But nevertheless, there is a sense of threat, there is a sense of siege, there is a sense of insecurity and paranoia, even when you are Israeli, because you think everyone is out to get you and you are an island in a hostile sea, or you're an oasis in a harsh desert. Now, so that is so much so why 48 changes the Middle East. And 1953 is very important because 1953 in Iran, something quite extraordinary is going on. There is a prime minister called Mohammad Mossadegh. He's aristocratic, he can be a little aloof, sometimes he's not very popular. But Mossadegh is sharp, he's courteous, he's intellectual, and most importantly, he has integrity. And he stands up for the right of Iranians to have control over their own oil. Remember, what has happened in Iran before is a period of colonization. Just as Egypt was a protectorate and it became a protectorate, which is an informal colony of Britain, because of Suez, because it was the artery to India. India was, of course, the jewel in the crown. Iran became important partly because of India and partly because Iran was declining anyway in the late 18th and 19th centuries. And the British manipulated Iran and ruled Iran through the Qajar dynasty. Now, those of you who want a longer overview can listen to a podcast that Glenn Carl and I did. Glenn Carl is a retired CIA officer. He's the author of The Interrogator. He opposed torture. He's a geopolitical analyst, a historian, a Renaissance man. And he and I did a 90-minute podcast on Iran. We go into the history as far back as the Safavids. We will not be going into that history today, but we will certainly examine 1953 a wee bit. And in 1953, basically, by that time, what has happened is the British have a sustained period of domination in Iran, and in World War II, of course, the British overthrow, along with the Soviets, they overthrow the Shah, the grandfather Shah, Reza Shah. And he's a Cossack colonel, he's a strong man, he's effective, he may be brutal, but he knows how to keep a lid on Iran, but he goes too far. He has Nazi sympathies. Remember, Iranians think of themselves as Aryans. The very word Iran, its etymology, it's interesting. You have to explore that. So Reza Shah backs the wrong horse. Stalin and Churchill get rid of him, and they install his blind son, Mohammad Reza Shah, who's weak, ineffectual, ineffective, dilettantish, and a softy pretending to be a hard man. But anyway, he's very convenient for the Soviets. He's very convenient for the British. And they will have a rivalry because for the Soviets, Iran presents an opportunity to reach warm waters, which was always a key goal because remember, the Soviet Union and before that Russia was expanding east. These were all empires, expansionist empires. They wanted control of more and more territory. And once, and Iran also, even before that, it is Winston Churchill who shifts the Royal Navy from coal to oil. And once that happens, Iran is super important because you need to control oil as much as you can. And the British now control Iran. And in 41, because of the war, they really need to control Iran. Because if the Nazis get hold of Iran, they will get oil and they will get access to fuel for their jets and their panzers. Panzers are German tanks. And that wouldn't be good for the Allied war effort. And of course, there's a reason you have the Tehran conference and yada yada. Now, all of this is continuing. And because the British are running Iran as a colony, they are giving $16 and also doing creative accounting. So they are not even giving, sorry, let me rephrase it. They are giving 16 cents to a dollar, 16% or 17%. I may be off, or maybe 18%, but it's certainly not 20%. So what that means is you earn $5. You get only one. By the sale of oil, you get only one because it's less than a fifth, not even a one. Uh, and because of creative accounting, they are paying even less. So the canny Brits, the sneaky Brits, whatever you want to call them, they are laughing all the way to the bank. It is Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, modern-day BP. They are having lots of fun. And by this time, the Saudis have done a deal with the US. And this is the famous meeting between Ibn Saud and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And there was a rivalry for Saudi oil. And of course, the Americans beat the British. And the Americans have a 50-50 deal with Aramco. So, considering the time, the Americans have been incredibly generous, much better than the European powers. And Mossadegh wants the same deal that Saudis have with America for Iran. Basically, he wants a 50-50 split. He wants the British to give him or give Iran its fair share. With me, everybody? Understood so far?
Yes.
And of
Yep.
course, the British say, no, we signed a contract. And the Iranians say, but that was under duress. If you put a pistol to our head, or if you put two pistols to our head, one held by Mr. Churchill and one held by Mr. Stalin, then maybe we will sign any contract. So that contract, is vitiated, is void by the idea of duress, which exists even under British common law. And none other than the great Boris Johnson, or let's say the not so great for some people, the man with many children, Boris Johnson admitted that we just took the oil on camera. A lot of older British people will admit, yes, we did it. And that leads to nationalization of oil company by Mohammad Mossadegh. And remember what is happening in the US? It is the Cold War, it is the beginning, or it is the full bloom of the McCarthy years. You're seeing communists under every stone. There is the domino theory, which will lead the US to intervene disastrously in Vietnam. And basically, this is a time when the Americans are really paranoid. And the British are very savvy. They play the Americans, in the words of many a CIA officer, older, obviously, a retired CIA officer. The British were like a wily uncle manipulating an adolescent, burly teenager. And the Americans were strong in the arm and thick in the head in 1953. And they went along with the British, conducted a coup. By the way, the Americans didn't even get oil. And the Americans, it was the British who got the oil. And the Americans installed the Shah on the throne and packed Mohammad Mossadegh off to prison. And yes, there was some discontent against Mossadegh. And yes, Americans fed the dissidents. And yes, there are lots of books on this. But the reality is, once they did that, the Shah ruled through Secret Service. He locked up all the secular opposition. He locked up all political parties. Civil society declined. And the only opposition that remained organized were the clerics, because people still went to the mosque. People prayed. And so, ironically, 1953 strengthened the clerics. And in 1979, fast forward, there was a revolution. Initially, it was a revolution where there were a lot of people involved. The leftists were involved. The free market people were involved. The people who wanted constitutional monarchy, they were involved. People who wanted a republic, they were involved. But the organized force that had the power to occupy the vacuum were the clergy. Ayatollah Khomeini came back from Paris. He took charge and he created an Islamic republic, which was theological. And this Islamic republic was very paranoid because, well, the military, the Iranian military, wasn't loyal to them. The Artem, which is the Iranian military, was actually waiting for an order to take helicopter gunships and just gun the crowds. So they created the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is the Praetorian Guard for Iran. And in effect, basically, you had the creation of a theocracy led by a very charismatic religious leader. And soon after the Iranian Revolution, there was the Iran Iraq War, in which the US backed Saddam Hussein. Yes, I know, this very Saddam Hussein, the US then um, dethroned. But Saddam Hussein, uh, you know, uh, obviously wanted some Iranian territory, some Iranian oil, and he saw an Iran which was destabilized after the revolution, wherein the military was in disarray, as easy pickings, as slim pickings. Saddam was always looking for slim pickings. He was a brutal dictator. He was someone who had a history of torture already. And the 1980 to 1988 Iran Iraq war was disastrous. Of course, many more Iranians died than Iraqis, but because they were so fanatical, because in Shia Islam, right at the from the onset of the religion, there is this culture of martyrdom. Because what do Hassan and Hussein do at Karbala? The two grandsons of Prophet Mohammad, whom the Shias venerate, they were hopelessly outnumbered, and yet they went out and died fighting. So, dying as a martyr in the cause of truth and justice is a sacred Shia tradition, and Khomeini activated it. And there were teenagers who would just walk through minefields to open a path for the military to follow. It was a ghastly and brutal war. And of course, eventually it came to a standstill in 1988. But that war further or deepened the paranoid, furthered or deepened the paranoid nature of the new theocratic Iranian regime. So this was a theocracy, and it also strengthened the arm of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And this theocratic regime then took root, and this theocratic regime, which had a millenarian view of Islam, took the view death to America, death to Israel. Yes, there are people who, there is, I think, a YouTube phenomenon called Roy Casagrande. He goes, I mean, he always, pins all the blame on the Americans all the time, and that's not fair. Geopolitics is a blood sport. Everybody's hands are dipped in blood in one way or another, and there are no saints. And the Iranian regime was fanatical, is fanatical, and it had a view of Islam that was intolerant. And after 1988, this paranoid regime decided that to have some sort of balance, it needed proxies, and it created Hezbollah in Lebanon. 1982 is when Lebanon civil war erupts, and they have. If I get a date wrong here and there, please forgive me. I'm functioning on very little sleep. We will have the correction. Our editors will fact check. So the civil war that led to the birth of Hezbollah. Then, of course, they backed the Houthis. In recent years, they backed Hamas. And the idea was that increasingly they were not just the upholders of Shia Islam, but they were the one Islamic regime that was uncorrupted, that stood up to the evil West, even as the Arab regimes made peace bit by bit with Israel, starting, of course, with Egypt. Remember the man who made peace with Israel? The Nobel Prize winner Anwar al-Sadat was assassinated. And so the Abraham Accords that happened in Trump's first term, or recently, as you've heard, our author Joseph Olmert, who is one of the best Israeli scholars and analysts. And you don't have to agree with him, but it's important to look at the world through his eyes. And he said that the UAE and Israel are de facto allies now. So as the Arab regimes drifted more and more towards Israel, the Arabs treat a lot of them looked up to Iran. So Yes, there's a traditional Shia-Sunni divide. It goes back to the civil war that began in Karbala 1,300 years ago. But nevertheless, Iran was able to project itself, as the upholder of uh, Islam and Muslims, even of the Sunni sort, because Hamas is Sunni. And so Iranian regime became a destabilizing force, became a very important actor in the Middle East that countered Israel and the U.S. And at the same time, in the Middle East, Israel became more and more powerful. And once Israel had vanquished its Arab rivals, it then felt most threatened by Iran. And the US, of course, has had to deal with Iran repeatedly because Iran has been opposed to the US. And speaking as someone who loves literature and writes, um, I can never forget growing up the death sentence, the fatwa that Khomeini passed against Salman Rushdie and sentenced him to death. And eventually it was a Sunni, not a Shia Muslim, who stabbed Salman
Mm.
decades later in America, in the neck and eye. Salman is now
Right.
blind. And so let us not have any illusions about the Iranian regime. Uh, and I have friends who've been packed off to Evin, the prison in Iran, and other prisons in Iran, who've spent days. One friend spent 123 days. He teaches at Berkeley. Another student of mine, when I was teaching at Berkeley, was also my favorite student. He was one of my favorite students. I shouldn't say upset and play favorites here, but the point is was imprisoned. So this is a regime wherein women have suffered, young people have suffered. There are no jobs. It has mismanaged the economy. This is a regime that has beaten, tortured, and killed young women for the most minor of transgressions, meaning a little bit of hair showing. Um, we know the Kurdish woman that triggered the death of the Kurdish woman that triggered mass uprisings. We know that this regime has not managed water resources well. So this is a regime that is oppressive. But as many people point out, almost all regimes in the Middle East are oppressive. It's a question of degree. Saddam Hussein's regime was arguably much worse. Hafiz Assad's regime, and then his son Bashar Assad's regime, al-Assad, if you want to use the al, they weren't exactly nice, clean, and squeaky characters. We could go on with each regime and point out the massive flaws. In a nutshell, what has happened is that the US believes and the Israelis believe that Iran has never been weaker. And they also think that they have to stop Iran from having nuclear weapons and missiles, because should they have these nuclear weapons and missiles, then Israel is a very small country. So Israel faces existential risk. One missile getting through means the end of Israel. And when they hear all sorts of anti-Semitic comments from the Iranian leadership, from the fanatical religious mullahs, it reminds them of Adolf Hitler and the Holocaust. So Israel it is understandable. Israel is nervous. The Iranians, they think that Israel runs an apartheid regime, and not just Iranians. Let's be honest, the Arab street um, and even young people in America or Europe or India increasingly believe that Israel runs an apartheid regime, that Israel has committed war crimes in Gaza, that Israel has been unjust to the Palestinians, they have pushed them out of their land. So these are beliefs that a lot of people have, and Iran fundamentally uh, opposes Israel, and because Israel is a US ally, it has its own proxies to contain Israel. The US, of course, made a mistake in 1953, but after 1979, as anybody who is senior in the US policy establishment will tell you, that they have no option but to contain Iran, because Iran is sworn. Iran has a paranoid hatred of the US, and the US has to figure out how to contain it. And the US has tried many things. Under Obama, there was, remember, the nuclear agreement, which Donald Trump threw out, the JCPOA. Um, you can look up the full form. I'm blanking for a second, but in a nutshell, there was a nuclear deal, and then of course Donald Trump decided on a maximum pressure strategy, and Bibi Netanyahu has made it his life mission to go down in Israeli history as the man who guarantees Israeli security, and he believes that peace through strength is the way forward, and therefore you can see what he has done. He has been aggressive. He has been uncompromising. He has used force, and the extraordinary capabilities of the Israeli Defense Forces, which are top in their professionalism, their technological achievements, competence, and indeed their courage, has led to Israel triumphing against pretty much every enemy. And they have had spectacular successes, like the pagers going off against Hezbollah fighters. Extraordinary operation, although a lot of people think that that's unjust and unfair, and the pages would cause collateral casualties. So do their bombings. But militarily, Israel has been spectacular. And as an Israeli officer once said off the record to me, in Iran, they had such intelligence penetration that they could kill anyone. Sorry, I rephrase. I blanked for a second. He said, we can kill anyone, anywhere, anytime. And you can see the assassinations that Israel has carried out in Iran, whether of nuclear scientists, whether of missile technologists, or top generals, or indeed, the Hamas leader who was visiting and staying within earshot or in a former royal palace or guest house. That Israel indeed had the ability to conduct operations anywhere in the Middle East and Iran. And so Bibi Netanyahu has done that. And Israeli belief was, if not us, who? If not now, when? Let's go for it. This regime is a threat to us. This regime is an existential threat to us. And Bibi Netanyahu pulled the trigger. And the Israelis are wary, but when it comes to Iran, there is public support for Bibi Netanyahu. And of course, the US has gone along, but the US has gone along because of a presidential decision. It hasn't got public support to the same degree as in Israel. Polls indicate 20 to 22 to 25, maybe, percent of Americans support this. Donald Trump hasn't got congressional approval. That hasn't happened for a while. In any case, we had our meetup in Washington, D.C. yesterday, and a great discussion yesterday. And people pointed out that, look, presidents have been going to war without congressional approval. So making an issue of it now is a bit, hypocritical, because other presidents have done the same, which is true. So they've gone to war, which is fine. That is now the precedent. That is now the American political tradition. But more importantly, there are two major doubts, even amongst Americans, that one, there is no long-term strategy for the war, and America has gone along with Israel because it is too beholden to it. And two, a lot of people particularly young people, think that this is an Epstein war. This is a war to distract from the Epstein scandal, in which a number of top political figures from all political parties, from both political parties, America doesn't have too many, but from both political parties, from the business elite, from the academic elite, I mean, including venerable figures like Noam Chomsky and Larry Summers, one from the left, one of the right, Bill Clinton, the Democratic patron saint, that, as well as you know, there are allegations about tens of Republicans as well. So this is a scandal that has engulfed Bill Gates and Bill Clinton, and indeed spiritual leaders, as I mentioned in the past, like the charlatan Deepak Chopra, who basically was writing emails to Epstein suggesting he come under a fake name and bring his girls along. So all sorts of people, and go in for the kill, all kinds of comments. And of course, he has since apologized on Twitter. But as people are pointing out, it is hypocritical because he was doing it after he had been convicted, well after. And I haven't even mentioned Prince Andrew and the Norwegian royal family and whatnot. So now the Epstein scandal is off the papers. Wag the Dog or something was a movie, if I remember, in which the US president goes into a fake war, or there was a movie of such, some sort. So a lot of young people in particular are saying this is a distraction. And so there isn't the same public support in America for the war. So it's an interesting phenomenon when it comes to Israel and the US. These are free countries, though, and we can talk freely about it, sitting in America. In Iran, it is much more difficult to gauge public opinion because, remember, in Iran, you had protests leading up to the war. Women were protesting, students were protesting. Of course, there are allegations that Mossad stirred up the pot and caused some rioting. Let's assume there's an element of truth. But even so, the discontent amongst common Iranians is real. Educated Iranians don't like the regime. Most young Iranians have lost belief in God because young people like to rebel. And when you tell them to go to church, they don't. And when you tell them don't go to church, they do. So, young people in Iran have lost belief to a greater degree than any Islamic country. And so there were massive protests. And there's economic duress. And indeed, what has happened is that students were out on the streets before the war. So so clearly the regime was unpopular. But in the few days that we've had the war, what has transpired? We've had massive bombings. The Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is dead. And that has led to an outpouring of grief because now he's like Hassan and Hussein. And mind you, in his last address, he referred to martyrdom. So particularly in the Shia world, all the way to India. And I went to university in Lucknow, which is a city established by Iranian military adventurer and was the center of Shia culture, Urdu literature, and a love for Iran. Remember, the Taj Mahal was built for a Persian princess. And of course, millions of Indians died because they were overtaxed. But hey ho, browning fuzzy wuzzy Indians should die for fair Iranians. They are genetically superior to the Indians. So the Iranian record in India is deep, and the Shias in India venerated Ayatollah Ali Khamenei as their pope, and so did the Shias in Pakistan, and they thronged the U.S. consulate in Karachi, and about 20 of them were killed because the U.S. Marines opened fire on them. So there have been demonstrations in Kargil on the China border. There have been demonstrations in Lucknow, the city I went to university. There have been demonstrations elsewhere. So the point is that the Ayatollah, in the words of an Israeli intellectual, a friend of mine, said that killing him was probably not the best strategic thing to do because he went from being an oppressor of women to a martyr in the Shia tradition and attained his salvation. And perhaps even if they wanted to inflict violence, they should not have killed. He was 86, I believe, or 87. I don't exactly remember. And he apparently was ill and dying. So if the Israelis had to kill, they should have killed all the generals and other people, but left the Ayatollah alive. Maybe I don't know enough. That is, I'm just giving one Israeli opinion, but that this was unwise. But the reality is, by killing the Ayatollah, they've made him a symbol of resistance. And perhaps, strategically, that might not have been the wisest thing. The Iranian response to the attacks have not been as fierce as some people feared, but they have not been as muted as the conventional narrative makes it out to be. They have hit radars. They have managed to create enough nuisance to stop the flow of ships through the Strait of Hormuz. So we are talking today on Saturday, the 7th of March, at a time when oil has crossed $90 a barrel, at a time when we've had a debt market sell-off, at a time when we are having fears of market tumblings. Markets have indeed tumbled in places like South Korea, which are very dependent on energy from the Gulf, or Japan, at a time when there is rationing, gas rationing for industry in India. And India in particular, the petroleum minister, said that India has only 25 days of reserves. It's supposed to have 90 days of reserves. But the minister was very busy on Epstein Island. He had a lot to do. So he forgot, to ensure that his country had 90 days reserves. Shall we say he was a bit preoccupied, Mr. Hardeep, the Honorable Mr. Hardeep Singh Puri, a retired Indian diplomat. And of course, as we know, Indian diplomacy is the finest in the world, at least in rankings from the bottom. So we are in this situation that a number of economies in Asia are in disarray, those who depend on energy from the Gulf. Economically, things are tense. There is the conventional view. We can go more into it. There is the contrarian view. We can go more into it. And then we can examine the implications of what comes next. But questions now. You have some of the context about the Iran conflict, I hope. And I hope I haven't utterly confused you.
I do have one question. I don't know if you want to answer this now or later.
Good.
But there has been talk of the Balkanization of Iran.
There was
Um,
talk of balkanization at the meetup yesterday.
yeah.
Yes.
Um, and how that might be the best outcome for Israel's security in the region.
Hmm.
Um, I also know that Iran is divided into, I read a mosaic of, what was it, 31 largely
Provinces, yeah.
autonomous regions. Yeah.
That's their defense strategy, their mosaic strategy.
Right.
Yeah.
Would
Sure.
that
I mean,
make
very quickly, context for our listeners who are not as well informed as you,
yes.
Shahna. The Ayatollah, before he died, had told everyone to prepare for 4 levels of succession. Okay?
Hmm.
So X dies, Y takes over. Y dies, Z takes over. Z dies, Q takes over. Okay? So that was the grand strategy. Okay? And they would be decentralized because, of course, if everyone is dead, then 31 people can operate boom, boom, boom. Okay.
Right.
So it's harder to cut off the head of the snake because there isn't one head.
Right.
It's an octopus with many heads, I suppose.
A hydra.
A hydra, sorry. Yeah. So hydra-headed monster. Okay. Then the other thing you're pointing out is that is the mosaic strategy. Okay. The
Mhm.
other thing you're pointing out is that's already you see Kurds moving into north Western Iran,
Mhm.
Arabs in southeastern Iran being restive, and the Baloch. So, look, there is a school. This may not be the dominant school, but there is a school in the Israeli establishment, and there is a school in the American establishment. We heard them yesterday. Be very open, be very clear that, yeah, Balkanization is an option because about 55% roughly of Iran is Fars, Persian. Remember, Iran was a mighty empire. The Safavids controlled huge territory. Remember that the British could only conquer India because a certain Nadir Shah, an Iranian emperor, sacked Delhi. And Delhi has never experienced such brutality, either before or since. With swords and knives, they killed thousands in 2, 3 days. It was an orgy of violence. They took back the Peacock Throne, the Iranian troops. They took back, they took with them all the jewels, including the Kohinoor, which now, of course, is in the British crown.
Right.
And it was in the vacuum that they left behind that Robert Clive, less than 20 years later, conquered Bengal and expanded the process of British expansion in India, or rather, inaugurated the process of British expansion in India. So the Persians are a long standing empire. They are an imperial nation. They are like the Russians in that sense. They are like the Turks. They are like the British. They are like the French. They are not Indians. They are not Kenyans. Got it, everybody? So they have
Yep.
memory of empire. And because they were an empire, a number of people within Iran are not really Iranian. They are non-Fars people. So you have Azeris, apparently 20% of the population. You have the Kurds, you have the Arabs, you have the Balochs. We could go on. That's immaterial. You can look up the CIA fact book and see all the different ethnicities in Iran. That and if the CIA fact book has been updated recently, you know they are planning something. Okay,
Mhm.
so the CIA fact book on Iran is excellent resource, and so are many others. So the important thing is that yes, you're absolutely right, and so there is a view in the Israeli establishment that if and we heard that from the Americans too, if everyone goes their separate way, then Iran will be less cohesive, even if it becomes a federal state, not a centralized unitary state with more local autonomy. Then they will be less of a threat to Israel, to the others. And in the worst case scenario, if they are all fighting each other, they'll have less energy to fight anyone else. So, absolutely right. Balkanization is certainly on the minds of people, and people are talking openly about it, as we heard in our off the record meetup yesterday. Okay,
Yep.
absolutely spot on, Cheyenne. Will it be the dominant option? We don't know, but that is an option because
Right.
Americans don't want to put troops on the ground and they want to get Kurds to move over and challenge, and they may get the other minorities. And the dream scenario for some people is that Azerbaijan moves against Iran, and and uh, and Pakistan moves against Iran, and the Gulf Arabs all unite, and the historic Shia Sunni split. Uh, the Americans back the Sunnis as they have for the last 50 years against the Shias, and there's a historic score settling. And at the end of it, Israel and the US achieve their objectives. The Sunni states achieve their objectives, and it'll be wonderful. Particularly, the elephant in the room no one is talking about is Turkey, another imperial power. Turkey will step into the vacuum that Iran leaves behind. So, this is one scenario. May not transpire, may partly transpire. We don't know. But it's unlikely it'll transpire in its completeness, at least this time around. It may in 20 years. Who knows? But I think this is one scenario, and it is an optimistic one as far as some Israeli and American thinkers are concerned. Yes. Next question, please.
Speaking of memory, balkanization, and particularly the U.S. perspective, do any of the war hawks in the U.S. side talk about what if it doesn't go their way? For instance, in a balkanized Iran seems somewhat similar to Afghanistan at any given point. Do they put any thought if the balkanized figures direct more of their anger towards America and Israel instead of each other for breaking apart?
That's a good question. I don't think that's an assumption war hawks make, because Afghanistan is today not a problem for the US as of today. And a balkanized Afghanistan is not a problem. In fact, historically, if the Afghans are fighting each other, it's better for all their neighbors.
That's true.
So historically, that is a case, because then the Pashtuns are fighting the Tajiks and the Uzbeks and the Hazaras. So historically, and you can listen to Thomas Barfield, the man who's written The History of Afghanistan, one of our authors. So historically, Afghanistan becomes more of a problem when you have a religious entity like the Taliban ruling, and then it directs its aggression externally. And the Taliban is at war with Pakistan as of now. Afghanistan and Pakistan are at war. So balkanization is actually not such a... If the Pashtuns were fighting the Tajiks, if the Pashtuns were fighting the Uzbeks, then Pakistan could breathe easy. But they are not. So they are fighting each other. So with Iran, I have friends in British intelligence many friends who take the view that a rump state might have even more anger, because national pride is a big deal in Iran. And they point to the fact that, yes, the Iranians want change, but they don't want America to bring that change, because a lot of nationalists, yes, some people who support the Shah want American intervention. But a lot of people, a lot of Iranians want to bring about their own change, want to rewrite their own constitution. They want to do it bottom up themselves. And they point to the fact that now with the invasion, all the people who resist have to flee because there's bombing. So they can't get out and gather together. They can't organize. So in a way, this war, what I hear from some elements, some of my friends who are Iran observers, all the way from Iranian experts who live in Western countries, to Germans, to Dutch, to French, to the British, many of whom have traveled around Iran, some of whom have very close relationships in Iran. In fact, one of our authors, British authors, his wife is Iranian and regularly visits family. So a lot of them think that what this has done is that this has given a new lease of life to an otherwise discredited regime, because nationalism is the last refuge of a scoundrel, and national pride has kicked in. And even the Iranians who want this regime to go think, yeah, but we want to create what we want. And we don't want external intervention. And when bombs start hitting schools and young girls die, then you get this stirring of national pride. When there are collateral casualties, then there is a stirring of national pride. When hospitals are hit, there's a stirring of national pride. And in the Muslim world, no one trusts Israel. That is a fact, except for the rulers and some intellectuals. But generally, the people on the street don't trust Israel, and they think Israel has hit hospitals in Hamas, and they will hit hospitals in Iran. So they don't like their own regime, a lot of Iranians, but they don't trust external intervention either, because last time there was external intervention in 1953, it was a disaster with a capital D. And the Kurds in particular suffered under the Shah. And so the Kurds certainly will not accept Shah. And there's a big challenge within the Iranian opposition. There are people who want a federal state. There are people who want a unitary state. There are people who want a constitutional monarchy. There are people who want a republic. And the opposition groups, I'm not even talking about the ethnic rivalries, the opposition groups are at each other's throats. I joked yesterday that if it was a bunch of Iranians in the room, we would have to take away the cutlery and we'd have to have everything plastic, because there would be blood by the end of the discussion or during the discussion. I'm kidding. I'm being facetious. Don't take me literally, those of you listening on YouTube. I have a sharp tongue, sometimes much to my detriment. But what I mean is that the Iranian opposition groups are, and the same for Kurdish opposition groups. It's a big challenge for Kurds to have their own state because they are always at each other's throats. So there's a challenge when it comes to coherence. And yes, Casey, you're right that there could be animosity and generational animosity towards Israel and the US. There is a possibility as well. But there's also the possibility that, that may not happen really, because, a rump state might actually become more modern, or maybe not a rump state, maybe a federal Iran, a republic, which takes the principle of subsidiarity from Switzerland, where the local mayors make decision and the provincial governors make decision. That might be a model for democracy in the Middle East and elsewhere. Because remember, Iran is a very educated country, and that is a possibility that is very feasible with the right set of circumstances. Iranians are one of the most talented people in the world. They are entrepreneurial, they are highly educated, women have high literacy, birth rates have dropped. In fact, one of the statistics that will surprise you is that mortality at childbirth in Iran is lower than the US. So Iran could become this modern nation in the Middle East and could even perhaps be a secular republic. That is a possibility. So there's a whole range of possibilities, from a Syria-type dysfunctional Iran to a federal democratic, not exactly Switzerland, but a republic modeled on the Swiss principle of subsidiarity. There's a whole range of scenarios. There are a whole range of scenarios, and a lot will depend on choices people make, but also on chance. Next question, please.
You actually kind of answered my question, because I was going to talk about Iran. One of the, I guess, outcomes is the word I'm looking for, is a democratic Iran. I've obviously been editing a lot of pieces this week regarding Iran, and that's actually come up a couple of times where people have discussed what happens next for Iran. Like, where do we go from here? What is the outcome, the best case scenario? And I've seen the idea of a democratic Iran thrown around. So that.
I mean, the best case scenario in a diverse country is always local democracy, protection of minorities, devolution of powers closer to the people, the Switzerland option. That's the only way you can keep a country peaceful over a long period of time. I think that is the model that would be ideal. And that is a model which would be ideal not just for Iran, but for Turkey, which also has a big restive Kurdish population. And that is a model that in theory could work for Syria, although Syria was very much a recent creation of Mr. Sykes and Monsieur Picot, a British and French diplomat, and Syria is not as naturally cohesive a state as Iran, and there are too many external actors, powerful external actors. So Syria is de facto fiction. I predicted this. Remember, we did a similar workshop on Syria, and I said that, look, there's no way Syria can be an effective state because no one will trust this chap Jolani or Ahmad al-Shara. No amount of U.S. President Donald Trump's spraying perfume on this tall, good-looking chap with wonderful skin is going to remove the stench of blood from his hands So, and we've seen, the Alawites don't trust him because, after all, he's fundamentalist. The Druze are putting their faith in the Israelis. The Kurds cannot forget what sort of outfit he belonged to. We all know what the Islamic State did to the Kurds. And of course, as we've heard from Joseph Olmert, it is Mossad versus MIT, not the nice institution in Boston, but the Turkish Secret Service, all the way from Syria to Somaliland. So Syria is now, you could say, the new theater for the old great game. External powers are jostling for influence. So the Ottomans are back. For a century they were out. Now they're back in Syria. Remember Damascus, Aleppo, that road from Istanbul that comes down was controlled by the Ottomans, and they had their empire until the end of World War I. So the Ottomans are back. After a century, they are back. So Syria, Iraq, Iraq is de facto, the Kurds run their own show, the Shias run their own show, the Sunnis run their own show. It's supposedly one state, but in reality it isn't. And eventually places like Syria and Iraq are likely to disintegrate. I'm taking a 50-year, 100-year view. It's like, the borders have always changed in history. So, but Iran has always been a big empire. So Iran is more likely, therefore, to pull off. It is a more sophisticated state. It is a more educated people. There is a more cohesive identity. And arguably, the Kurds in Iran are better off as part of Iran than as part of a new entity. So they may cast in their lot with the Iranian Empire rather than a new Kurdish state with risk of civil war. Next question.
Can you talk a little bit about how this will lead to stagflation?
Sorry? How could this lead to stagflation? Ooh la la. That is... now we are talking about the economic implications. So let's very quickly, we'll do some crystal ball gazing. Okay. What is the conventional view? Conventional view is, number one, let's go through it. Number one, military imbalance. The US and Israel are so powerful, and Iran, in the words of Fareed Zakaria, is very, very weak. All Iran can do is pinprick attacks, and Iran has committed a strategic blunder by attacking the Sunni Gulf powers. And so this conventional thinking, and mind you, Fareed Zakaria supported the Iraq war in 2003, and his legendary lines is that if you have taken your sword out of the scabbard, you have to use it. I don't think Fareed has ever pulled a punch at anyone. I very much doubt it. He's from India too, like me, and he's a softie. I actually had to do some fighting, so I find his opining on war juvenile. But anyway, hey ho, there we go. His point was Iran is very, very weak, and that is the conventional thinking people buy, and therefore the US and Israel will bomb Iran to smithereens. Eventually, the IRGC will make peace, and the Iranian response. Number two. So I'm drifting into the second point. Iranian response. The Iranian response has not been that great. They haven't damaged that much. Air defenses have held up. Life is, sort of continuing as normal in the Gulf states. For years, the deterrence factor was that if you go against Iran, Iran will take out water sanitation, water desalination plants. It'll attack the ports. It'll destroy the refineries. It'll shut down the airports. It'll destroy economic infrastructure and decimate, or that maybe that's not the right word. They will destroy economic confidence in the region, and that will lead to meltdown, and that will lead to contagion, and that hasn't happened. And And Iran has proved Iranian response has been weak. And in 2 weeks, Iran will run out of drones. Iran will run out of missiles or effective drones and of missiles, if not missiles, certainly launchers. And somebody who comes to power in Iran will have to sue for peace because, in the words that stick in my mind, the Iranian regime may be mad, but it is not suicidal. Okay, that's two. Number one, military imbalance. Number two, the weak Iranian response. Number three, of course, the Iranian regime has internal dissent and growing internal strains. So they are not in a position to continue the war effort. Number four, the Sunni Shia conflict, which I already talked about. All the Gulf Sunni states will gang up. Even Azerbaijan, which is Shia, may gang up because it's an Israeli ally. UAE is an Israeli ally, and Pakistan may join in the show because, hey, hell, why not? Maybe you get more of Balochistan, and then you don't have the Iranians promoting insurgency in Pakistani Balochistan. And remember, before Pakistan appeared, the Safavids and the Mughals fought for Kandahar thrice. There were 3 legendary sieges of Kandahar. So the great game before, everyone talks about the Russian Empire and the British Empire playing the great game over Afghanistan. So that whole belt from Balochistan to Afghanistan was basically a cockpit for the struggle of power between the Safavids, who were Shia, and the Mughals, who were Sunni. So in that scenario, you'll have, Farid Zakaria told Prof. G, they've committed a historic blunder and it'll all end. And of course, now you have a decapitated leadership. So point 4 is who's going to lead, right? They may all end up, the mosaic strategy, 31 people, they may all end up firing here, there, and there may be no coordination, and ipso facto, Iran will fold. Okay. We just point out that may be true. You can never say, definitively in war what will happen, but we have our doubts, or at least, some contrarian people have their doubts. And the counterpoint is that Iran's military capabilities appear to be more resilient, all right, than assumed. So it has been able to damage American bases. It has managed to cause enough loss of confidence to shut or to stop shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. And remember, terrain works in Iran's favor. Iran is not flat. It's not the alluvial Gangetic plains or the Indus plains of Pakistan and India. Once you cross the Khyber from Afghanistan, you can just roll your tanks or your troops all the way to the Bay of Bengal. It is not flat, a desert like Iraq, where you can shoot tanks as if they're sitting ducks. Yes, you can. You have very high quality imaging now, and you have seekers, you have radars, and now you can hit things precisely. But still, Iran is mountainous. You can tunnel things, you can hide things in mountains. Yes, even though you have intelligence, it is harder to hit. You can have guerrilla war in the mountains, as in Afghanistan. So terrain favors them, okay? And logistics, favor them as well. So let's talk about logistics. So you've got to get stuff through secure bases, through the Strait of Hormuz, or through air. So, and air is more expensive. As we know, the US Air Force consumes the most oil. It's not the Marines, it is not the Navy, it is the Air Force. So you can supply stuff, but it'll be expensive. You'll be flying your big planes and dropping them, and you have 2 aircraft carriers. They will cost a lot. So every day, the bill for the taxpayer is going up, 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 up. So we will be paying taxes. Or we will be paying interest on the debt. Remember, interest payments crossed $1 trillion. US debt is $37 trillion. And this war is expensive. And if prices at the pump go up, as they are for a while, if US and Israel don't achieve a quick victory, and if the terrain and logistics make this war more of a long-drawn effort, then there'll be less and less public support. It'll be a war of attrition, and it'll be a question of who has the patience. And the Taliban always used to tell the Americans, you have the clock, we have the time. We will just be back because we are willing to fight it out for longer. We are willing to bleed for longer. Eventually, you will get tired of spending blood and treasure. And so that is something that should the Iranians or the regime, one of the other things is that let's assume, yes, the regime is really unpopular. But as Joseph Olmert, our Israeli co-author, pointed out, that let's assume 20% of the people support the regime. 20% of 90 million is 18 million. Still a lot of people. Also, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. A lot of Iranians hate them. And they can't flee. They can't flee to Pakistan. They can't flee to Afghanistan. They can't flee to Azerbaijan. So they are like a cat in a corner. They have their backs to the wall. For them, it is existential. Should they lose, they could be tried and sentenced to death by a new democratic Iranian government. Yes, of course, they could also have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, as in post-apartheid South Africa. But the IRGC is going to fight because it is existential for them. So you could have a war of attrition, and even though Iran may be bombed flat, all the cities may be rubble, like Gaza, it may still have some fight left in it. And the US in particular might just, and the Israelis are admitting they need US support. They say eventually it is the US that has the ability to do anything there. And the US may just lose interest. The public, the herd may turn. And then what happens? So the military imbalance may be exaggerated. Also, Iranian response may have surprises in store, right? Even though they may become weak and everything, they might be able to replace some launches. They might be able to build some. They might be able to spoof ships in the Strait of Hormuz. They might be able to, and they have already hit the THAAD system, the radars, destroyed launches, hit bases. So they might be able to still cause nuisance. And we are not even we are not even going into the possibility of covert Russian and Chinese support. After all, many people have watched Charlie Wilson's war, wherein the US supported Mujahideen, which later went on to be Taliban, to fight Soviet troops. So there might be covert support. Then we get into the internal dissent. That might be overegged. National pride may unite the Iranians for a bit, even temporarily. All right? Shahada, martyrdom, has sacred status, as I explained in Shia theology. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has gone from villain to hero. Mm-hmm. Why? Because now he's not seen as a killer of women. Now he's seen as a family man. And this is an Indian who wrote a piece. Yes. A family man who loved his children and not even a Muslim. And this family man has become a martyr. He made the transformative choice to fight for justice and truth against tyranny and evil. So, and we see the reaction all across South Asia, how women are beating their chests, crying that I will be willing to die. I would, go and become a suicide bomber. All of that crazy stuff. And men are all beating their chests in unison and crying, and so it has unleashed the Frankenstein's monster in a way, and that is something to take into account too. I was at an Iranian demonstration in front of the Ferry Building in San Francisco, and I was there Sunday, 6 days ago, and everyone was dancing, and protesters were handing out roses, and they were very educated, and they were very articulate. And that is also true, that a lot of Iranians are educated and articulate, and they want freedom, and they're sick and tired of theocrats. And yes, they have lost belief in God and Islam and whatever, and conventional religion. That is all true. But there are still 300 million Shias, and a lot of them still retain belief, and a lot of them thought of the Ayatollah as their pope, and a lot of them are angry. And yes, you may say most of them do not have the arms, do not have the motivation, do not have the intention even of becoming martyrs and blowing themselves up. But their will to fight, let's say the 18 million in Iran who are still devout Shias, their will to fight has been fortified. There are enough. And so the internal dissent may be overestimate. And as I said, the opponents of the Iranian regime are deeply divided. They want different things. Someone wants constitutional monarchy. The Shah folks, the Shah lives in Washington or in the Washington, D.C. area. But there are some who want, a republic. Some want to go left. Some want to go right. And I'm not talking of all the ethnic groups. But because they are not united, the regime may be a bit stronger and may have life in it yet. Eventually, of course, it'll collapse, for sure. Because people will eventually lose belief, the social base is becoming narrower, just as Bashar al-Assad collapsed. Eventually, the Iranian regime will collapse. But not yet, not now, all right? This attack may have given it a new lease of life, okay? Let's move on to Shia-Sunni conflict, Sunni-Shia conflict. Our reports in the Gulf indicate that the Sunni states are not that keen on a fight. Look at Qatar. It warned that energy exports would stop. There's a lot of lobbying in Washington, D.C., because these Sunni royalty often has a narrow social base. The Arab street and the Arab palace are at odds. They are at odds with each other. And because they are at odds with each other, the Arab palace wants peace with Israel, wants to do business. Mohammed bin Salman may have chopped up Jamal Khashoggi, but he's invited Cristiano Ronaldo, who's not married and has multiple children. So they are, they want to host World Cups. Qatar did host a World Cup. They want to have sport. They are worried about running out of revenues that cover their generous welfare states. You see that discussion on Fair Observer with Bryn Bernard about Kuwait's universal basic income. And they don't have a stomach for a fight. Also, they've been soft, fat, and lazy, these Sunni regimes. So they don't really want a Shia-Sunni or Sunni-Shia conflict. And also, Iran has not really attacked water desalination plants yet, or even gone hammer and tongs at critical oil processing infrastructure, except for Bahrain, which is a Shia country ruled by a Sunni. The only country they've targeted with greater ferocity is Bahrain, because there the Iranians probably want regime change. They want, during the Arab uprisings, Bahrain had a lot of protests because it's a Sunni royalty ruling over a Shia population. It's not very popular, and Bahrainis have had to invite Saudi troops. So the important thing is that the Sunni-Shia conflict may not materialize. the decapitated leadership idea may not be sound because of this succession planning of 4 and the mosaic strategy. They may have had their orders, they may just keep going. And also remember other factors. Israeli resilience. Israelis are suffering. They are weary. We've read that on the BBC. We've read that on Israeli media. They're weary. They do support the war because they fear Israel. But if a siren goes off thrice a day, as my friends are having, are experiencing and are having to deal with, you take your children, you go to a bomb shelter, you come back, then you go again, you come back. It lowers your productivity, it lowers your income, your expenditure has gone up, and your income has fallen. And yes, although the Israeli stock market has risen, as Joseph Allman said, true. Although Israel is signing arms deals because Israeli arms are so effective, nevertheless, right now your income is going down, and Israel is a small country which lacks strategic depth, and if it starts getting hit, especially its critical infrastructure, the Israeli capacity to take pain may be limited, not because they are soft, but because they're just small and they lack strategic depth. And during the 12-day war, Iranians did manage to inflict damage on Israel, and they probably could. Similarly, yes, the idea that Iran's air defenses are depleted, yes, but the defenses in the Gulf states are also depleted. First of all, the interceptor missiles cost an arm and a leg. Second of all, the Iranians have indeed destroyed many radars and many of these systems. And the US is moving the missile defense system from South Korea. And also remember that without troops on the ground, it's really difficult to achieve your aims. Why is that? Because, you can bomb, but at the ground level still, the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, controls. So America had domination of Vietnam's skies. They didn't win there. The Soviets had domination of Afghanistan's skies. Yes, before the Stingers came in, and yes, jets started falling out of the sky, but even so, the Soviets didn't win there. America had control over Afghanistan's skies and Iraq's skies. In the first Gulf War, they won because that was a limited operation, but in Iraq and Afghanistan, they didn't. They overthrew the Taliban, and when they left, the Taliban were back after 20 years of blood and treasure. So much so for the massive taxpayer expense, and so much so for so many people who died. So without ground troops, and I don't think Americans will stand for it. That's a red line. I don't think you can send special ops soldiers, and I'm sure they are there, but you can't politically send ground troops. Okay, the shipping is blocked. When we look at the Financial Times, okay, what is going on? Power prices in Europe are swinging wildly. Some have risen 20 times in a few hours. Qatar has said energy exports could stop in days. Oil is $90 plus a barrel. There is energy rationing in India for manufacturing. The South Korean stock market is plummeting. And so this is a supply shock. Remember 1973? There was a supply shock. It was an oil shock. All right? It was to do with Iran to some degree. Iran led it. In 79, there was an oil shock. Okay, 1979, the dollar left the gold standard. 1973, the dollar left the gold standard. Richard Nixon. So you could have pressure even on the dollar. Let's say Japan suffers. Let's say Japan sells US bonds. What happens then to cover its costs? So there are multiplier effects. With me? So the economics of it, not just are much more beyond block shipping. And now I'm getting to the stagflation the stagflation thing is very real, and this is what an economist point out, and many traders are pointing out, investors are pointing out, and the Arab countries have invested big time into AI. They've invested into U.S. treasuries. They've invested into stocks. They've invested, not just on Wall Street, but in Silicon Valley. They've invested in real estate. And financial markets are more interconnected than ever. And Arab investment companies have become powerful. For Christ's sake, just look at who owns the best football clubs in Europe. Those watching us from around the world, and the most popular game in the world is football. Who owns Paris Saint-Germain, the current holders of Champions League? It's the Qataris. Who owns Manchester City? The Emiratis. Who owns Newcastle United? The Saudis. And so there's a whole bunch of Arab oil money that has come into Western economies. And if confidence dries up, if they may not, A, buy as much, and B, they may have to sell off their assets to meet their expenses. And so then you cannot raise interest rates. Sorry, you cannot cut interest rates at all. Maybe you can, but you are facing the specter, more importantly, that your stocks and bonds will go down. So you end up having stagnation, but your prices will go up because the conflict has ensured that you have higher gas and oil prices. And mind you, a third of the fertilizers in the world come from the Gulf. And so you have a massive supply shock. And so you get stagflation as in the 1970s. That is what The Economist was pointing out last night, that this war could lead to stagflation and a lot of us could be poorer. That is a real risk. We have to countenance it. We cannot run away from it. Does that answer your question, Zania?
Absolutely.
Good. Very good. All right. I think we've had a fantastic discussion. And thank you all for your time. And we welcome further questions. We are here available to shine the light on complex issues, to make sense of the world, as we always say. Send us your questions. Get in touch with us. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Press the bell icon, and let us know what next we should talk about. Thank you.
Thank you.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.